slides somewhere
Yeah.
between. And also announce that we'll be closing the meeting room, unlike every day where we keep it open. The meeting room will be closed, so people who are joining late will not be able to join.
Okay, a very good morning, everyone. Welcome for today's session. But before we start our session, so once again, I like to repeat that tomorrow morning there's a compulsory joining before or on 9:50 a.m. as our Minister, Honorable Minister of Sports, Mr. Kiran Rijiju will be joining, and he will be addressing us before the clinic starts. Today's topic is developing a swimmer to elite level. This will be conducted by Coach Chris Martin. Coach Chris Martin currently is the head coach of Malaysia. He has 30 years of experience as a coach and was head coach of Pedi Aquatics USA for many years. He has produced many Olympic swimmers in USA, and he is a FINA speaker also. We welcome Coach Chris Martin. Sir, you can start your program. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks a lot for having me this second time. I did want to say that this has been a fantastic experience for me. I hope that it's helped people here. Yesterday, I was speaking to the #2 man at USA Swimming, the managing director, and telling about this program. Told him that I was seeing 500, 600, 700 coaches sign up, and he was very envious. And I think that this thing that you've done is fantastic. The topic is about developing elite swimmers, and I want to warn people. I may say a few things that are controversial today, but they are my belief system from doing this for a long time. So I will sort of press on. The first is that. And actually, this was great. I heard this in another presentation in your series here, and I forgot who said it, but I heard someone talk about the word talent and how many people think that you have to be talented to be an elite athlete, and whichever coach it was from your group said that it isn't that simple. The talent isn't this naturally occurring, born with you thing. And I agree with that 100%. To get to the level, there are a couple things you need to do, and they're actually more simple, I think, than people give it credit for. And I will talk about those in due course. The second thing I wanted to speak about is the idea of the 10,000 hour rule. And I believe the guy that the scientist that sort of quoted that was, I think its name is Anders Ericsson or Eric Anderson. He's a Swedish exercise physiologist. And since he coined that many years ago, he had said he wished he could say that again, because people were under the misconception that if you spent 10,000 hours doing something, you would necessarily be a master. And that is not the case. He's the first person to say that. I think even in Malcolm Gladwell's book that attempts to talk about that, when you get to the end, he sort of says that, Dr. Erickson, it is not the 10,000 hours itself, it is what you do in those 10,000 hours that will help you be elite. So having said that, the things you need to do to become an elite swimmer, to me, in my idea, happens at 2 levels. All right, and the first level, there is a certain skill set that is required to kind of get in the game, and I won't speak so much about that. I'm going to speak more about the critical years from puberty onwards. But having said that, I would like to say that I guess it was, I call him, because a lot of people are named Partha, I guess I'll call him Young Partha. The skill development program that he laid out in his talk a couple of days ago and the video clips that he showed from his training base, I thought was absolutely marvelous. And the way that he sort of laid that out in terms of body development, I was envious. I wish I had had that when I was developing age groupers. And that is the kind of program that at the earliest ages, if you can start with that sort of thing, you know, those are the kind of exercise progressions and attention to body parts and body areas that are germane to swimming that will put you in the area that you need to be before you get to what I'm going to talk about today, which is the critical eras of elite development. Okay, and when I say the critical years, I'm pretty much talking about the years when hormones start to become a factor. Peak height velocity, I know someone else spoke about that the other day. When those things start to come online, that's when the last few levels of coaching and training begin. And it is especially in those first early years when those things happen, where the story of where you're good, if you're going to go on to the elite track or not, gets written. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So if you're trying to develop someone to an elite athlete, what you're doing is you're trying to create training that's laying the skill, the physiological, and the psychological foundations needed for an athlete to reach their full potential or maturity. That's what you're doing. That's what you're thinking about each and every day. And in order to do that, you sort of need to be taking a long view. You need to understand what's going on with your athlete in terms of their physiological growth and development, their anthropometric growth and development, and their psychological growth and development. You need to know where they've been, where they are, and where they're going. That's the first stage. Okay, in this development process, and some of this has been said before, but I'm going to reiterate it, that the nature of swimming as a sport, the nature of swimming, that it happens in a medium that is not subject to land gravity and where your weight is partially supported but also totally resisted, means that aerobic endurance is the critical factor in all events. All right? I would almost, I mean, anything, especially after a 25 is the only thing where this doesn't come into effect. For a 50, it does, and everything longer than that. And the term I like to use, which defines that, is unlike running or jumping on land, the water fights back. The water has to be overcome. All right, so aerobic endurance, absolutely necessary. And then early skill development and the potentiation of that development is the key to success. All right, and in lots of the presentations I've seen, talking about Dryland things, talking about teaching the kids how to move, and when I get to the stroke part, I'll talk about that. Critical skill development and the potentiation of future skill development is the key to the success on land. And then what you're trying to do is, and this is in terms of the physical part, you're developing the working capacity of your athlete. And that means all the energy systems are going to kind of come online when the hormones come, and you're going to try to create an environment where the athlete is able to work all their energy systems to their fullest development and develop within their window as best and as full as they possibly can. And that process of developing working capacity and developing all the energy systems works best concurrently. Okay, thinking about the actual training factors, I'm going to divide this into things that are necessary. All right, in terms of skill development, all right, and I use that word very precisely because the way I look at it is this. First, you need to be physically prepared to learn movements, all right, and that involves some skills. And then after that, you need to learn the techniques of the movements that are simple movements, but they take into consideration how the body works. And then once you get your body working well and the way it's supposed to, then those techniques lead to more complex stroke movements. All right? And then the reinforcement of those more efficient movements, then you perfect that swimming technique by repeating it enough that it becomes, and I heard someone use the word muscle memory, but yeah, what technically happens is something called myelination, where the nervous system becomes used to those movements and then makes them almost automatic. It's the same thing with learning the violin or the piano as it is with learning swimming strokes. Now, I love it when people say, oh, this person is talented more than another person. I don't necessarily think that's what's happened. What's happened is that person had basically good movement skills, whether acquired from play or practice. Someone developed those body skills into simple stroke techniques, and then the myelination effect made those into superior stroke mechanics, and that's what a layperson calls talent. Whoop. Sorry. All right. Now, when we are doing the process I just outlined, we need to think in sort of two terms: the physical capacity and the physical development of the athlete you're working at, and also the psychological aspect of what you're doing. Now, it's easy to go and look in a book or to do peak height velocity measurements, like we were told the other day in a presentation, and from that, match the energy system development with the biological maturation of your swimmer. We do that all the time. But there is even a more important thing, in my opinion, that we need to teach for elite performance to be a result, and that is to instill one thing. And that one thing is we need to instill a desire for incremental improvement over anything else, even from the high self-esteem derived from age group and junior success. And this isn't just germane to swimming. This is germane to any endeavor. Any endeavor. The people who make it to the top, all they do is get better at what they do a tiny little bit every day. Now, the brain is a muscle that should and that can and should be trained. Now, I give a whole nother presentation on this which I don't have enough time to do, but I will try to put this down into one little story. And now complexity theory has been able to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Why human beings got to the top of this planet is because we are fantastic at one thing: learning incrementally from our mistake. We throw a ball up in the air, we miss it. The next time we throw the ball up in the air, we replay what happened the last time. We make subtle calculations that are basic over and under, and then we catch it. And it is that evolutionary skill that makes mastery possible. And if a human being is, if that is instilled in a human being and we sort of stick with that, we can become very good at most things. The problem we have in swimming is we often get sidetracked with success that comes along the way. And we get sidetracked into wanting to win A, B, C, or D. But if you want to have an elite performer, don't addict them to winning. Addict them to improving a tiny bit, and not always measured by the clock, but getting better at what they do, and that's the road to success. What you see in front of you, and I would recommend this, I give this to every age group parent in my program, is a book, you may have heard of it, called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck, a teacher at Stanford in whose office I have stood and spoken to. And the very principles that I just talked to you about a minute ago, she divides into two categories called fixed mindset and growth mindset. Fixed mindset is only being attenuated to the result. Did I win? Did I lose? Did I go 29.5 or 30.1? A growth mindset is when you are fixed with what did I do the last time? What did I do this time? And was I better at doing it? And I'm not sure if you can see that slide. I'd recommend buying the book Mindset. It will tell you how, if you're on a fixed mindset, every obstacle has a chance of sending you to either quitting or plateauing. When you're in a growth mindset, every obstacle you come is just a challenge to be overcome. And in swimming, with the complexity that the sport involves, it is critical to be on that mission. A second principle of psychological growth to your athletes is you must speak to the mind of your athlete. There are different athletes and swimmers who learn in a different way. I personally use the VAC method, where visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. You will find kids that they want to learn something by looking at it. There are some that want you to tell them what to do. And there are some who, unless they're actually playing and feeling and doing it, they're not going to learn. I myself am an auditory learner. So of course, as a coach, especially as a young coach, I have a tendency to talk. I'm sure you all can hear that I am a big talker. And there are some swimmers that just doesn't work. I have to just put them in the water and say, yeah, I'll give you one idea, play with it, come back, I'll show you again. That's how they learn better. Other people, they want to see a video. But just because you, as a coach, like video, visual feedback or kinesthetic feedback, that doesn't mean your athlete does. So with all my swimmers, I give them the VAC test, and then, which is a written 30 questions that reveals to me how they like to learn, and then I behave accordingly. I'll sort of skip over this fast, but this is a little bit of an extra thing that I do that I kind of learned from someone who's in the military, but that is the idea of body perception. All right, and we start on land with teaching them that, where they just pay attention to their body in space and in touching, and then once they're very small, and they learn how to do that on land, or as I call it, in the air, they get better at doing it when they're in the water. We think it helps boost concentration, it helps boost working memory capacity, and it helps them to do that thing which is very, very important for the growth mindset, which is pay attention to the present. When you're racing, it is about what's happening now, more so than what has already happened and what's going to happen. Two more things on mental development. What you have in front of you is a very old slide that I still think is very relevant. It is a famous basketball coach who won 30 collegiate championships in the USA, and it is his pyramid of group success and how your team goes through different stages on its way to team mastery. And I'll figure out a way to, actually you can find this on the internet, but I'll see if I can get this shared with you. I still think it's very, very relevant because it's far easier to instill in a group the idea of incremental improvement, especially if they share it, than it is to do individually. The reason that is because, as you know, children are subject to peer pressure. And if you want to have a great program with a great team, you need to make the peer pressure go your way. You want the group to be trying to live to your ideals, and that little chart there helps it along. Okay, so those are the underlying sort of aspects of what you need to ever become elite. Mainly in here, and mainly in the skills that you have before what I'm going to talk about next. I hope everyone can follow along with that. Now I'm going to talk about swimming training. All right, now swimming training and a lot of other kinds of training, I like to divide into 3 phases. All right, 3 phases: a preparatory phase, a development phase, and a competitive phase. Now next, I'm going to talk about how that works within one season, but it works for all seasons, for all your life. And really, you should be looking for a circle within a circle within a circle when you're developing an elite athlete. So whether you're thinking about one season or 3 years or someone's whole competitive life, you need to be thinking of where are you in the ideas of a preparatory phase, a development part of your training, or are you in the final competitive part, whether that is for this year, for this quadrennium, you know, for a 2-year cycle to your continental games, or for the, you know, the end of your competitive career. I hope everyone can follow that. All right, now, in terms of a season, I put a sample there of a competitive season. And if you noticed, I've divided it into the 3 parts. In red is the preparatory phase, in yellow is the developmental phase, and in blue is the competitive phase. And if you notice, that changes a bit depending on how old you are. If you're under 15, if you notice, your preparatory phase is a bit longer. As you get older, the preparatory phase can shrink a bit because even though you may have had a break after the blue zone, you learn over time, you know, what you learn sticks. So your preparative phase doesn't have to be as long. All right? Your developmental phase stretches out, and as you can see, it gets a bit longer as you get older. And then finally, the competitive phase is very, very small when you're, when you're pre-hormonal. It gets to be longer as you get older. And then if you look down to the bottom, once your hormonal window has closed and you're a full-grown adult and there's not too much more, aerobic development to be done, and you're a fully functioning senior, then we can talk about repeatable cycles, or, and I know someone brought this up, or even a reverse periodization type thing. So that's an example of dividing up growth and development into its 3 component parts. Now, when you're planning for a season, or even when you're planning on any kind of development of your swimmer, you need to be thinking of some factors. In what stage of development are they in? And that means physiologically. Has peak height velocity happened? Have they, what part of puberty are they in? That sort of thing. You need to understand their gender. And this is because, men and women react to training a bit differently. Part of that difference has to do with the flotation, the drag profile, the aquatic profile of the swimmer, and how that affects their internal physiological and pulmonary heart-lung system. The better you float, the more work you can do, the higher heart rates you can get without recovery. With less recovery, I should say, not without recovery. Third thing you understand is, what is their physiological readiness? By that I mean, what training have they done before in terms of that week, in terms of that block, in terms of their life? The fourth thing is, what is their competitive readiness? And by that I mean, what physical state are they in? I don't know, food-wise, training-wise, dryland-wise. How ready are they to be competitive? Their psychological readiness. Where are they in their head? If someone is in some kind of psychologically bad state for some reason, it has nothing to do, might have to do with school or family or whatever, that's going to affect how ready they are in your training and competitive season. And then you also need to consider their social needs and acceptance factors. And for me, that skips back to what I said before about the team readiness and the idea that you want the group dynamic to be flowing in your direction. For the factors that get one athlete acceptance by the other, you want that to be some of the things that were in that slide, like hard work, teamwork, loyalty, commitment to training, commitment to improvement, commitment to whatever it is that you think is important, both as an athlete and as a life citizen. So you can't just be sitting there writing things down on a piece of paper that comes out of a book and saying, oh, this is training because someone else did this practice. You need to conceive of what you're doing, both long, medium, and short term, and that's the way you need to be doing it. The thing I like to tell coaches about is being a great coach, the things that I think are most like it, I know a lot of people say artists, and I keep saying no. People who are good cooks can be good coaches, and definitely people who know agriculture, they're going to be good coaches because they can hold in their idea, the idea of the small and the idea of the large at the same time. Right. as I, tying in with what I said the other day that I spoke, you need to think of energy systems, but you need to think of energy systems in terms of the athlete you're coaching. I said this before, so I skip right over that. Age groupers are not little seniors, and seniors are not bigger age groupers. You can't give a 12-year-old Caleb Dressel's practice and think that's going to help them. Again, when I talked about energy systems before, there are many of them. And the question you need to ask yourself is, are you using these systems to make your athlete faster now, today, or at one championship meet, or not even a championship meet? Or are you using it to make your athlete better? What, in a perfect world, you should be doing both at the same time always. Until, I always put that caveat in there, you're training someone for the last swim of their life, that's different. Other than that, you're always looking at the future as well as the present. I guess this sort of sounds a little bit like overkill, but I need to say that. When you're writing your training, you want to be thinking of A, who are you dealing with? 2, what do you want to achieve or get done? 3, what is the time scale that you want to get this done? And I'd add to that, is your time scale realistic? And then 4, what tools do you have to get this job done that you want to get done? Do you have them? Do you need them? When I'm working with national team coaches, or people who want to get up to that, I try to get them the tools they need to achieve their dreams. If they don't have it, or if they don't want those tools, then I have to have the hard talk and say, well, then maybe your athlete is better off being somewhere else. But you have to at least have the thought of what are you going to need to achieve, how much time do you have it, what have you done before. In analyzing the plan, these are what I just call helpful hints. Helpful hints to make your training better. How's your plan periodized? Does your plan include psychological skills? And that is critical. If you haven't practiced somebody, being in front or behind, someone missing a turn, someone being in front of a crowd when they swim, if you haven't included what happens if, someone shouts at you before your race, what happens if you break your goggles, if you haven't thoroughly rehearsed scenarios where your insular cortex gets away from you and sends negative talk to your brain, then you're not doing everything you can as a coach. You want to make sure your kids are psychologically ready for all, or at least most, things that will come up in a competition. All right? Does my plan also include motor development? The start you do at age 14 is probably not going to be the start that you do at age 20. The reason for that is because you are going to have an increase not only in limb size, you're going to have a different limb ratio than you had before, and your motor coordination is going to change, and not always for the better. There are athletes who are very, very skilled at 12, go off the rails, especially males, for 2 or 3 or 4 years while they're figuring it out. Then when they get to 18, it comes back together. Are you paying attention to the motor development that will happen when you're teaching a skill and refining it over the years? Also, how many competitive peaks do you have in your plan? And is that concurrent with their physiological development? Also, is your plan, oh, I just said that. Is your plan relevant to LTAD, long-term athlete development? Is it compatible with others on my team? And is it consistent with your coaching style? You know, no matter what, I would love to be like a real famous coach and wish I could talk like them or be like them or do it the way they do, but you can't do that. You have to coach within your own coaching style, and you need to deliver information and plans consistent with the way you are as a person. Okay, now here are some concrete examples, and some of you, I guess, have been waiting for it, but I always try to save the numbers till the end, because people have this, you know, and I used to work in China, and I'm not saying anything negative about it, but over there, everybody just wants to copy down the numbers. How much of this, how much of this, how much of this. And that eludes the whole point that I started out in the beginning of the 10,000 hours. It isn't about the numbers, it's about how you fill your time. But, you know, I know people want to know it, so this is an example of me with highly developed juniors, kind of on the way to seniors, who've had a good upbringing, and kind of how I would divide out those 3 phases that I put in that other slide that was red, yellow, and blue. So for like a prep phase, that would last up to 6 weeks, up to 9 sessions a week in the water, some land movement within the water sessions, 3 gym sessions a week in addition. And for me, any morning sessions would be focused on concentration, dry land, and kicking. Afternoon sessions, more on technique and traditional stuff. And in the prep, the prep phase, I'm working on 60% aerobic fitness, 40% technique. Not working on a whole lot of speed in the beginning of the season. When I get to the developmental phase, now I'm starting to do what I call, you know, max training, which is I've laid the groundwork, and then for a long block, and I do believe you need longer blocks when you're developing swimmers. 6-week cycles, 4-week cycles, to me, in my opinion, in my, you know, my experience, it's not as effective like it is for seniors. It is more effective to have longer developmental blocks. And in these long phases of the season, I might go, you know, 10, 11 sessions a week, begin specialization for the season, introduce cycling from endurance to kind of high aerobic. And one of the ways I might do that is, and that is by session, where, you know, I might have 3 endurance sessions, 2 anaerobic, 4 endurance, 2 anaerobic, 3. I would cycle like that. I would introduce some test sets so I can see where I'm going. And then in the early parts of their life, and also in the preparation phase, I'm working on technique, and I'm working on the ability to myelinate those movements. But when I get to the development phase, I'm trying to have a focus of technique under stress. And I have certain ways of sort of doing that, making the stress happen, and then not worrying about the times, but making them worry about or reminding them about how their technique is, even though their mind is under practice pressure. Some sample test sets, you know, these are fairly difficult, but when I want to test the endurance ability of someone, this is one of my sets where I make them go a 1500, 2 minutes, take the lactate, 15 more 100s on short rest, take the lactate, make them stand up, 200 max, peak lactate. You know, that tells me a lot about their endurance ability. If I want to know what their anaerobic capacity is, what time, my test set, 8 100s on 5 minutes, best average, crunch the numbers, I get something out of that. Strength, 5 rep max on a squat, swim bench 15 pulls, pull-ups with a weight. Doesn't matter what these tests are, it just matters that they are homogeneous to the program you're running. Speed test for me, everybody, you know, wants to do time swimming, and that is something, but I think an over-reliance on the 25 sprint or even the 15-meter sprint, I try to have something a little bit extra than that. So I give 5 pulls on the swim bench, and that helps me. And also, it's the 3rd and 4th pull and how much power they produce there. That helps me as well. And then a kick test, kick best average test. That helps me a while to try to figure out how much energy kids are spending to float themselves versus whether they're moving forward. When I get to those tests were for the developmental phase. You know, as I'm going through, I might run that test 2 or 3 times within 15 weeks to see how things are going. When I get to the competitive phase, I guess, you know, taper, that's a whole nother conversation. 2 to 3 weeks long. First thing I do is cut down the sessions and reduce the volumes, but I try to maintain the frequency of which they touch water. One of the mistakes I think people make in the competitive phase is they try to give people rest by giving them workouts off. And I first make my workouts shorter before I start giving them off in the number of sessions. Reduce the repetitions in a test sets so they maintain the test set, but there's less of it, so the speed should increase. Phase out the gym training. Maximize the focus on technique quality and awareness of their technique. But what I don't do is try to change technique in the last couple weeks of the season. Those are the wages of sin and failure. If you need to have made your technical changes long before you get to the competitive phase. There might be an attention that you can have someone focus on something else, but if you want to try to change their technique, you might be in for getting something you didn't sign up for. And then your aerobic swimming becomes more recovery, and quality becomes more competitive. So any quality you're doing is starting to be a part of the race. It's starting to be a split. You're starting to target making real what you want to have in the race. And your aerobic swimming just becomes recovery from that second bit. You know, that's pretty much what's happening once you get into the last few weeks. Land training. I have a saying that I kind of use, which is posture is better than power. And you do not want to be trying to gain land strength, especially when you get near the end. You want to reduce the chance of injury and minimize the loss of training time, which is why I start to cut the gym sessions way down or out before I get near the end of the meet, because what I do not want is someone getting an injury in the last couple of weeks and wasting a whole year. And pretty much the rest of those things say that. I'm a little bit conscious of time here. But what you do want to get out of land training is the correct pathologies caused by swim training. And you want to have land, you want to make sure you put the brakes on. The body will put brakes on if it's in danger of injury. So one of the things, you know, even with the older kids, I'm like, in plenty of time, put those bars down. Yeah, a few simple exercises in the gym, many physical interpretations in the pool. Remember in the beginning of this, I said basic movements lead to complex movements. That happens on land, and that happens as well in the water. And that's the way you need to look at it. Getting better at pushing a weight and having more weight that you push, that's not going to make you necessarily a better swimmer. What you want is you want enough stability in a part of your body that you're going to use to make a dynamic, hard movement. You're going to turn that movement into a basic stroke. You're going to refine that into a better technique stroke. Another thing you can do on land is to find the weak muscles or the weak connections in your kinetic chain and its stability and strengthen them. That's what land training is best for. Remember your goals, both short and long term. Remember that process is the most important thing. I am not smart enough to do this without a logbook, although I guess now, you know, people do it in computers, which I can see that, but I guess people now do it on their phone. Now, I'm not young anymore, so for me, I have to conceive of information across the continuum, and the way I learned in life is, you know, my language reads from left to right, books go from beginning to end, calendars, you know, go long way, so I can only think in terms of 4 years, 1 season, 1 week, half a week, 1 practice like this. I can't conceive of doing things up and down like scrolling on a phone, but you youngsters are probably better at doing that than I am. Good on you. But however you're taking in that information, you want to make sure you look at it backwards as well as forwards. Not only do you need to know what you're going to do in terms of a plan, but you need to know what you did before, how that worked out for you. See things through, like see your plan through, but be prepared to challenge your own thinking if that's required. Boy, to talk about this would take a lot more time than I have, but I will say this very quickly is, in terms of skill acquisition, and this is a little bit controversial, I can't believe I'm gonna try to get this in the last 10 minutes. And with all due respect to what passes for biomechanics, I think the idea of position-based stroke coaching is on the decline. When I think about it, there have only been 3 great innovations in swimming in the last 50 or so years. Butterfly coming out of breaststroke, the wave breaststroke, to which we all have, our breaststroke is all kind of a result of that, and underwater subsurface travel. And biomechanics, or, you know, what I call scientists, they came up with none of those. 2 coaches and 1 swimmer came up with those ideas. And those ideas are a result of paying attention to what the body does, what it can do, and what's happening to it. So what I try to teach people to do is to make strokes that take into consideration how the body works and what is happening to that body. So we try to teach, you know, I try to teach kids on the way to elite level what we call perception. Perception, and that is movements that deal with breathing and stability, movements that deal with and pay attention to how the water is feeling both underneath you and on top of you, and movements that deal with the internal sense of the body, both of its shape and the physiology that's going on within it, and realizing where you are situated in the water. Okay, I really believe that if you're in a program, you want to be teaching the other coaches that work with you, assistant coaches or even co-coaches, you know, what your ideas are, what your plan is, what you kind of believe in. So I try to teach my assistant coaches everything. I divide tasks where, you know, an assistant might have female distance, another one male distance, another one IM, because I'm trying to spur on their learning. And a lot of times when you're coaching, you know, too many different things, you don't really learn the lessons of development. But if you coach kind of one athlete for a long time, or a group of athletes in one thing, you start to see patterns of human development, and I think that's helpful. And then, you know, just to make my program better, I hope that the people I'm working with, I try to give them tasks that they can become good at. And my general teaching sequence goes the history of the event, previously successful training methods, and that's kind of sports science, the understanding of athletes, the integration of psychology, and then can you construct a workout, and finally, can you construct a season? And that's my last slide, but I will share one last story is, I remember being an assistant coach to a great coach, a world level famous coach. His name is Dick Schulberg. You may even know him. And when I was a young coach, I was just an assistant, doing what I was told, learning along the sequence that I told you. And one day we were coaching 85 people in a 10-lane, 50-meter pool. It was utter chaos and things were going on. And at the same time, a person 6 lanes away and at the other end of the pool made a slight stroke change. And at the same time, both the head coach and myself both went, "Hey, look at," and we were pointing at the same person. And my coach said, he smiled, he picked up in those days was a clipboard, and he said, "Today you can write your first workout for the group." And it was because he understood that I saw patterns in amongst chaos. And that was the most important thing that he could teach me. And that was a big step in my learning career. So that's it. I'm open for questions. Somebody tell them to me.
Thank you, Chris, for a nice presentation.
That was an awesome session, Chris. Absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
So we'll just come back to you with a few questions. Let us see. One of the question is, what should be the ideal ratio of swimmers to coach so as to give 100% attention for the early development of skills and techniques?
Ooh, that's a tough question. And the reason is because the answer is never, no one can afford to have the ratios that you really need. You know, if I'm teaching someone to swim, to basically swim, you know, I never want more than 6 or 7. If I'm teaching someone in a senior group, I like 11. But if I'm in an age group development program, nobody's going to have, you know, you're going to have to coach way more people than that. And I've had, you know, 15, 16 in a lane. So I wish I could tell you what's perfect. If you can get down to 11 or 10 or less, you can do some amazing quality work. If you can get down to 6 or less, you are blessed. And any less than that, it's luxury.
Another question is, do you think we should plan something different for female above 12 years of age compared to male?
Definitely. Like, in fact, that is where, that's almost where the dividing line comes. Because what happens at 12 years old, you can have situations where the females can do more work than the males. And you need to allow that to happen, even though you know that within a year and a half after that or less, it's going to switch over. But, you know, girls will enter puberty at an early age, and their body needs to be challenged to that level. In American swimming, what the story that you always hear is, you know, there's always some hotshot 12 and under girl who's swimming with a 14 or 15-year-old boy and dragging on their feet. And as much as that is a social weirdness, you got to make your program so that that stage is going to happen, and then will eventually evolve into what it happens to. That's the best description I can give. But if you just come with the idea that, you know, boys do this and girls do this and they're always together at the same age, you won't develop champions as easily.
Another question is, how often would you do a repetitive test set, like milestones test sets for seniors?
I would say, okay, 3 weeks and 6 weeks, depending on the test. Now, because the energy mix can change actually within 3 weeks. Now, usually I will wait for between 4 and 6 to repeat a test because I can kind of see what's going on. But if I'm starting to get to the second half of my season and, you know, and I'm really trying to fine tune things, then I might repeat a step test in 3 weeks just to see what has happened. But no less than that. No sooner than that.
Thank you so much, Coach Chris, Monal sir. But before I do so, I'll just like to announce once again that tomorrow we would like all the coaches to be here in the forum on or before 9:50 a.m. because our Honorable Minister of Sports, Mr. Kiran Rijiju, would be attending the forum. Monal sir, would you like to put some questions?
Yeah, I just started down a few, but before that, I'll again repeat what Partha said in Hindi. कल हमारे माननीय मंत्री श्री किरण रिजिजू जी इस गैदरिंग को एड्रेस करने के लिए 10 बजे शार्प इस फोरम को ज्वाइन करेंगे। तो सारे कोचेस को और पार्टिसिपेंट्स को बताया जाता है कि आप कृपया करके 9:45 9:50 के अंदर लॉग इन कर लीजिए और 10 बजे के बाद ये मीटिंग रूम की लॉगिन हम क्लोज कर देंगे। तो कल की सेशन आप मिस करेंगे अगर आपने 10 बजे के पहले लॉगिन नहीं किया है तो। So having said that, I'll come to the question. Says Chris, there's a coach who's asked that if we have 4 peaks in a year cycle, is it necessary to work on the aerobic base in every cycle?
The answer to that would be yes. I mean, well, first of all, depends on how, okay, sorry, this kind of question really interests me and jacks me up. First, I have never in 37 years of coaching had a 4-peak season. Even a year, I either try to have, now that doesn't mean there's not 4 competitions, but I cannot have 4 peaks in a year, even for a senior. I'll either have 2 or 3. But if you have to have 4, if you have to do qualification meet, then if you're going to have 4, you're going to have to work on the aerobic part for at least 2 of those 4, probably 3 of those 4. And if they are still in their aerobic window of opening, I would never not do any.
Thank you.
My thought.
There is somebody from the younger Partha's team who's asking that I have heard that vestibular, visual, and proprioceptions are not fully functional till 15 to 16 years of age. So do you think it is important to work on the skills we worked at age 9, 10 and to work again when they become fully functional at that age, 15, 16?
That's a good question. I have read some of that too, and I have read that some people don't even think that humans have 3 divisions. So what I do is I actually, to be fair, I've never really worked it on 9 and 10 and unders like that. I've always worked it on post 15-year-olds. Having said that, even when I give the test out, I'm always looking for the people that score really, really high in one area or another. So my answer to that person would be, even with the younger swimmers, just pay attention. And if they never listen and they're always playing with something with their hands, then try to teach them in, in the learn by doing way. If they really, really obsessed with looking and trying, then I teach them in that way. So it doesn't always have to be done by, by a formal exam, but if you have people that are really, really skewed to one way of learning and you're skewed to another way of teaching, why torture yourself? Meet them halfway.
Yeah, that kind of addresses the issue. There's a question coming from a coach on the training adaptation or practice adaptation that the coach should be careful about or need to do for female swimmers in their menstrual period.
The question is what to do during
the
their
practice, the coach, what kind of changes the coach needs to make if he has female swimmers who are in the menstrual cycle?
Listen, I can only tell you what the science says, and part of this is, I've coached in the NCAA, and there's been a lot of work done, and also with the old Eastern Bloc countries. There's no real need. My experience and what I know is there will only have to be a slight. If a female is in cramped stress at the very, very beginning or the onset of menstruation or in day 1, maybe you might have to adapt your training, but not for very long. 1 day, 1.5 days, unless someone has some kind of really chronic problem. However, what I also can tell you is, and then after that, I wouldn't change a thing. And what you can pay attention to is, the science seems to show that 7 days after, the menstrual cycle begins, people will they'll be in the best physical performance ability that they have. And, I've tried to manipulate that a little bit in terms of giving people hard training, medium training, and lesser training so that I can have that peak happen right at a competition. So if you're thinking, oh, I have to stop training for a week, that is not the case. And if you really want to know what to do, read some books, because they are out there. And at the highest level of elite performance in every sport, the women that are achieving that, they know what to do. And their coaches know what to do within their cycle. But I could talk about that for hours. That's one of my big things.
Thank you. I'll just take this
Yeah,
one, Partha, and then you take the next
sure,
three.
sure.
It seems to be a coach who didn't pay too much attention in your last session, Chris. Therefore, I took this question. He's asking how much volume we can give to swimmers under 15 in 80 VO2 max LT.
You're right. He didn't pay attention. You know, I'll kick that back to him. Why do you feel the need to do these high anaerobic stresses with kids under 15? That's what I'd say to the questioner. Why do you want to do that? Now, if at 14 or 15, they are, the hormones are coming, you want to do some. But the idea is you don't want to do too much. But the fact that someone's asking that question means that they have either read somewhere, seen something, know that the famous people do a lot of that kind of training sets, and they want to do them. And that is looking at the problem backwards. You want to look at the athlete you have and see how much of that kind of training is required for that athlete at that age and act accordingly. And you're right. I spoke about that on the first day I was here.
I totally agree with that, Chris. I think, we are going to give you some tools, but as a coach, you need to understand what kind of tool you're supposed to use for your groups.
Exactly.
It's not
People want to
necessary
buy a
you,
cool looking hammer and then hammer everything. Let's hammer some 10 and unders because we got a great hammer. No, doesn't work that way.
I totally agree. I think that's the way we are supposed to think as a coach. So we should get the ideas, but which ideas to be enforced for a particular squad depending on the squad, the need of the squad, and what you want to achieve from the squad.
Yes,
So
sir.
coming back to a question which is also a out of the box question, but I think a lot of coaches love to know this, your view. If a performance of a swimmer is stagnant for a while, of course, in a
Yeah.
developmental phase that happens.
Mhm.
And of course, the kids is going to be depressed, he or she. How do you think, and what are the strategy coach should take to overcome that phase
Okay.
or motivate them?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, this is a lot hard. This is a lot easier to deal with nowadays than it used to be. And the reason is video. Now, the answer to that question is before you get to the part where they reach some kind of plateau, you want to have addicted them to getting better at doing things. So when someone is, even if they're getting their best time, you don't just say, oh, this is your best time, congratulations, and move on to the next kid. In fact, the way I do it is when they do their best time, I say that last. I immediately say, oh, yeah, you know what? Your turn was wrong about this. You put your arms in there. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. Oh, but you got your best time? That's nice. Then they say, Coach Chris, I got my best time, and all he did was talk about all the things I did wrong. Then the next time they go to swim, they're trying to fix those things. And the next time they swim, they're going to fix those things. And then if they get to the first plateau and they did a bunch of things right, I say, well, you did these things good, and you didn't get your best time. And maybe if we fix these two other things, you will get your best time. So you're not caught out when the plateau happens. So that whole thing I said about mindset, you want to do that. Now, in addition to that, and these things are easy to show in the year 2019 because you can just show them on video what they did. So you can always have a conversation about what happened that doesn't just involve the time. People who get success in age group swimming with early success in doing best times, they're doomed to reach what Dr. Mindset Lady calls the early peak, because there's nothing else to happen is that when you get a peak, you're going to have a mental block. Whereas if you've made a growth mindset, that's not going to happen. Having said all that, in addition to that, I make sure that people swim a lot of events when they're developing so that if one goes bad for a little while, then they can have success in something else while you're going on. And then that whole tree of the open mindset is full and developed, and they're paying attention to a lot of things, not just one thing. And then final words, you know, when the women reach a peak, it's usually a result of, you know, I'm not going to say poor coaching, but coaching that didn't anticipate their body development. When a guy reaches sort of a plateau, they're usually involved in some kind of growth spurt where their coordination is going wrong. When I'm training kids, I'm looking far ahead at both of those things to happen, and I have my strategies all ready so that when it happens, I know whether to turn the train right or left, up or down.
Thank you. Very well explained, Coach Chris. One more question I like to put in. Swimmers in the age group of 10 to 14 tend to perform really well and they have a good improvement rate. But when they grow up, the performance comes down. What is the reason, in your view? Is it physical or psychological?
It's totally physical. First of all, if you're you know, if you're talking about one person 10 to 14 and they stop going faster at 14, then that is 100% physical, 100%. And if you're training a group together at 10 to 14 and making no differentiation between 10 and 14, then again, that is a coaching problem. All right. If you are paying attention to long-term athlete development and doing the correct things at age 10, at age 11, at age 12, at age 13, and at age 14, then when you get to 15 and slot into the next sort of things you're going to do, they will get better. But if you're just repeating the same thing year after year after year from 10 to 14 and then trying to do it again at 15 and 16, they will not get better. They will not.
So there is a connected question to what you just said, and this is more specific. So the coach is saying he's got a young swimmer, 10 years, who is showing good signs of improvement in all aspects of performance, except in his physical development, that is height and weight.
Right.
So should he move him forward to competitive training, or should he think more in terms of a long-term plan?
He should think in terms of a more long-term plan. And when I say competitive, no. But what he should do is do as much skill work as possible. And even at 10, you don't really need, you know, the aerobic window hasn't quite opened yet. It'll probably open at 11, 11 and a half. So you want to make the skills the best you can. You want to keep the young boy away from the shorter races. When they get to 11 years old, dive into the aerobic window. Keep the focus on the longest possible events you can do. Save the sprinting and the anaerobic work for as many months or years as you possibly can do. And then you've got all that money in the bank that you're going to be able to play with when they get to 14 and 15. That would be my strategy. What I would not do is win the 10 and under 50 freestyle and 50 breaststroke in every meet. That is the surefire way to an eventual plateau.
Thank you. The next question is, estrogen increases adipose tissue. Will this affect positively or negatively in girls?
Well, yeah. I mean, the truth is, I don't know how to say this diplomatically, but I know what they're saying. Yeah, I used to have a saying when I coached a lot of age group girls, 16-year-old girls are nuclear weapons. And you know, that is, if you don't do the job right, if there's no training, that will be peak physicality for most people. Because when the adipose tissue comes along, it's hard to work, you know, it's harder to get that going. But if your training has been sequential and you have worked on a long-term athlete development plan, when that change is made and that tissue starts to come on, it'll transition either into fat metabolism storage, or it can be turned into muscle. But what you can't do is just be hammering with your hammer, and then when that menstruation comes, keep hammering with your hammer and say, oh, why aren't they getting any faster? Because they won't. I hope that's clear. I may not have used the correct English for that, but I think you might know what I meant by it.
Martha, I'm trying to spot a
Yeah, I'm trying to spot
valuable
the
question
relevant
here.
questions of, yeah, I can see few of the questions regarding girls, which have already, discussed about it.
See, I get that all the time where you have the questions about girls, and that usually means the more questions, I mean, I hate to say it to you gentlemen, but the more questions you get about that means that the more people are probably have no separation in their training. And that's the problem.
Someone have asked, without lactate and VO2 max training, how to win age group nationals in sprint events? I know. I want you to take this question. Actually.
That's a great. Well,
Yeah, how do you win the age group national?
Part one. Sometimes you gotta let the age group nationals go if you want your kid to win the best potential.
That's something I think you should point out, right?
Definitely. You just don't win the age group nationals. Now, then my second part would be if you really are obsessed, win the age group nationals with as little VO2 max training as you can get away with. And then I guarantee if you got fourth at age 12 with less VO2 max training, the next year you'll at least get third. And the next year you'll probably be better. But if you're obsessed with winning it at 12 and VO2 maxing it and anaerobic training it, you probably won't win it again at 14. Sorry.
Yeah, but it was important for a lot of age group coaches. I think they should realize that fact.
Can't have everything.
And especially
so this
as
is
you
a very
mentioned,
generic issue. This is a very generic issue. It's not a technical question, but probably has to do with some insights that Chris, from his experience, can give. So there's some coaches who are asking swimmers. There are swimmers who do their best in practice, but in competition results are exactly opposite. How to deal with it?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably 50 to 55% could be in the mind. There are a lot of people, and I know an expert who can explain this much better, but you have a motor cortex that does something. Then you have what's called an insular cortex, which lights up the emotion thing when you're under stress. And what happens is that gets in the way of the motor cortex. And there will be some people that have this problem where that thing gets turned on at a competition. Maybe their mom puts pressure on them. Maybe they're scared of a crowd. It could be anything. And that gets in the way. So that is probably the most reason why that happens. The second most reason that happens is usually, and people will probably hang on to this, is that when they're swimming in practice, they will probably be well aerobically trained, and they will swim aerobically and finish anaerobically in practice and do a good time. Then they'll get to the race, they'll dive in, they'll use too much anaerobic energy in the beginning of the race, and it will have effects on them at the other part of the race, and they'll go slower. Scenario A, scenario B, or a mixture of both is usually. I can't say that's 100% of why it's happening, but I have found that in most cases where that happens, it is one of that combination. Okay, is that helpful?
Yes, it is.
Okay. This is not actually a question, it's an observation by a senior coach, so I'll address it here. He's suggesting, and maybe we can have Chris throw some of his opinion into the hat. He's suggesting that we should have 1500, 800, and 400 events for age group 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 compulsory at nationals. Then only the coaches' training will change.
True.
Maybe we should take off the 50s from the lower age group so that the right training happens. Would you?
All right. Absolutely. Let me tell you how this has been done. Now, it's hard to do because everybody wants to make the money from the 50s. So you know what we did in the UK? We made sure that in the UK, they made sure that at the age group nationals, the main awards come from what they call, there's some name for it. I don't even know. But if you swim, if you can swim 3 200s and an 800 or a 1500, and you get the most points added up from those 4 things you get like a giant sized trophy that's 20 times bigger than any of the winners get for winning one race. Man, that changed things overnight. And in America, what they do is they have what they call the IM max score. And you don't get invited to the zone trips or anything that's really cool unless your IMAX score is above X amount of points. And that comes from 3 200s and I guess maybe a 400 IM or it's some, calculation of longer events to try to take away the love of the 50s in the younger age group. So that guy, tell him I wish if I was king of the world, I'd do exactly what he said.
Well, discussing it is always the starting point for anything. So let's hope we are able to do things differently.
In the UK, it was a smashing
Yeah, and it's very
success.
encouraging to see so many questions coming up with different queries, and which is very encouraging that people are keen to develop their knowledge for the development of their squad. I think it's a good sign for Indian swimming overall.
I have that effect on people.
You do. I can see that.
Although I always get a bunch of biomechanists and strength trainers, they hate me.
Okay, so
Someone has just pointed out Singapore have 200.
Yeah, that's more reinforcement to the earlier discussion.
Right.
Trying to find a question that we could address to Chris for everyone's benefit. There's somebody who's asking, I'm not too sure what it means, but can you talk about critical and sensitive periods among athletes?
Yeah. I mean, some of these are based in science and some of them are just based in experience. For boys, the first critical age is 11 and a half. I start to be able to see something there. For girls, the first critical period is peak height velocity. I can't say enough of that. It's also critical for boys, but for girls, it is absolutely critical. Like when that happens, you need to, it's what I call striking while the iron's hot, and that's when it heats up. A third critical period is when boys have their second growth spurt, in those high school years, 14, it's usually like 15, 16, where they sometimes plateau and can even go backwards, and then boom, they shoot out and get a whole lot faster, and everybody thinks they're an overnight success. Those are the 3 sort of critical areas. Then when you're coaching senior swimmers, when the window closes, you have to slightly adjust training and not just hit them with, oh, well, you used to be able to go, a 1500 at this speed, and now it's 8 seconds slower. Try harder. Because the window's closed, so now you have to adjust the training to more VO2 max and anaerobic training. So those are all critical periods that the coach needs to be ahead of when they happen and not be like, oh no, what's happening? You need to know it's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to come, it's here.
I
The
think
line is, it's not about, I mean, it is about the training, but it's not about the sets. It's about the athlete doing the sets.
Someone is asking how to identify a weak muscle during dryland workout and technique change in workout.
Ooh. How to, well, I guess the best way is to, well, the way it would happen with me is someone's making a motion and I can see that I want that motion to be a little bit different. And then I'm going to say, can you do whatever it is? And if they can't do it, then they're going to say, if I do it the new way, I get a pain or a soreness in that part of the body. And then what I do is I say, draw a circle around where that soreness is. And that's how I find where the weak muscle is. And then I go to this, you know, I have to think of an exercise or get the strength person to think of an exercise that will isolate that weak tendon or that weak muscle and go there. You understand that sequence?
Makes sense, yes. Partha, we are coming close to our window.
yes, yes.
So if you have not spotted any specific things, questions, once again, we'll reinforce that tomorrow's session, everyone is required to log in before 9:50. We have our Honorable Minister of Sports coming on 10 o'clock sharp to address the coaches and participants in this session. We will have to lock the room prior to his starting his session. So it is in your interest, please log in before 10, ideally 9:40 to 9:45 a.m. And Chris, wonderful session once again. Thank you for taking all this time to prepare for this and giving us such a